grew up in 1950s, Kentucky. She was a black girl. She attended black schools, black teachers, and shaped. Those schools were not as well funded, but were places where the teachers knew their students. There were classrooms that when Gloria enthusiastically raised her hand, she was seen. And when she spoke, she was heard. And then desegregation came. And from the outside, looked like progress. Signs came down, laws changed. Black children were finally allowed to attend formerly whites-only schools. But inside black communities, desegregation carried a different cost. Many of those schools were closed. I'm dropping it enough? Okay. I thought it sounded like that a little bit. I can't quite tell. Oh, here we are. So many of those, because of desegregation, many of those schools closed, and many of those black teachers and principals lost their jobs, and those black authority figures were replaced by ones who had little relationship with the children sitting in front of them. Now, excited for her first day of school in a new school, she raised her hand as she always had, but this time it was like she was invisible. And when she spoke, the teachers sometimes looked startled, as though the voice did not quite belong to the body it came from. And no one named the change or called it a problem, but Gloria could tell something had shifted. And so she began to watch carefully. And without being told, she learned to calculate what moved things forward and what was quietly discouraged. Writing became a place where she didn't have to rush or disappear. On the page, she could follow a thought all the way through. And as an adult, this pattern continued in new rooms, in new institutions, and each one carried the same unspoken instruction. If you want to belong, answer the way we want. Ask the right questions at the right time, in the right tone. And she learned how the system worked, the rewards and the quiet consequences. But because she understood it, she also learned something else. She was not powerless within it. She could comply or not. Now, Joseph lived in another small town, vastly different time, different century. He was a carpenter, and he was shaped by the expectations of his world until the woman he was engaged to marry was found to be pregnant. Joseph knew the law, the customs. He knew what people would assume and what he was expected to do. Scripture tells us he was a decent man, he's righteous, didn't want to expose her to cruel public shame, and so he chose what seemed like the careful path, no confrontation. He'd just walk away quietly. And then he had this dream. There was no thunder or spectacle, just a voice in the night interrupting the decision he'd already made. Do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. The words didn't remove the risk to his reputation. They invited Joseph into a larger story and let him decide whether to bear the cost. God placed the decision in his hands. And Joseph chose not to take the exit he'd planned. He bound his future to hers and stepped into a life that wouldn't protect his standing in the community or offer any easy explanations. He didn't solve a problem. He simply chose not to walk away. Now, Gloria and Joseph obviously lived in vastly different worlds, different cultures, different centuries, and yet they shared this in common. Each of them could have stepped back and saved themselves the trouble, stay quiet, dismiss quietly. They knew that in the face of power, silence is rewarded. Those are the kinds of exits people take every day that often seem quite reasonable and even logical. Now, you may know Gloria better as Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks chose to write her name in all lowercase. And you wonder, why would she do that? In part, it's to make the point that we're quick to argue about such trivial things and debate presentation while ignoring what is being named. Partly because it unsettles us. And what she named was that force she had been living with since childhood, the force that made silence feel necessary. But she named this not with some complicated academic theory, as many of us like to do. She simply called it fear. Not fear as panic or weakness, not fear as a feeling that comes and goes. Fear as a system, a force that convinces decent people to step back quietly. And then she named the only force she believed could interrupt fear's grip: love. Which is where some who admired her sharp critique dismissed her as naive. Stay in your own lane, you're out of touch. As though love were a soft answer to a hard world. But Bell Hooks was not sentimental about love. She was precise. And she defined it clearly. Love is care and commitment. It is also knowledge and truth. And it is respect. For her, love was a disciplined practice of choosing what fear tells us to avoid. Because fear trains us to accept versions of love that feel safer. But she warned, if you remove any part of what she named, love will collapse into something else. Without care, for example, love stops noticing when it causes harm. And without commitment, love learns to leave when it gets hard. And without knowledge, love mistakes ignorance for innocence. And without truth, love avoids conflict and calls it peace. And without respect, love slides into possession. For her, love was demanding, not dominating. And she insisted that love must be politicized. Not partisan, but political in its deepest sense, concerned with how we order our shared life together, with who is protected and who is dismissed quietly, and who is asked to carry the cost for others to feel safe. She said love is the only force strong enough to interrupt that pattern. And that's not only her conviction. That's what God does. And that's what the stories like these are doing in Advent. God is interrupting fear in the middle of it. Not waiting for everything to calm down, but God entering lives shaped by risk and hard choices and helping us refuse fear as the final word. And I'm not talking about extraordinary events, but ordinary people like Joseph, a carpenter, deciding what to do and staying present will cost something, maybe even everything. I'm talking about the kind of things that happen to us almost every day. The ways fear is woven into the conversations we avoid. The ways fear pulls us back from relationships that protect us from getting hurt, but leave the other person exposed. The situations where keeping your mouth shut would keep things smoother for everyone, except you. Those are the exits fear has trained us to take. And they don't look dramatic, they're reasonable. This is exactly where God enters the world. Not by removing risk, but ensuring that we don't take that risk alone. And like Joseph, God asks, where am I being asked to exit quietly? And where is love asking me to stay present? Fear gives Joseph a respectable exit. He can be compassionate and still disappear. But Joseph understands Mary is already carrying the risk. Her body carries the danger. Her reputation is on the line and her safety is uncertain. And Joseph's respectable exit would have protected him. It would have allowed him to remain righteous and untouched by scandal, but it would have left Mary to carry the full cost alone. And love refuses that arrangement. Love, as Bell Hooks describes it, begins with seeing clearly and ends with staying present. And so, using her framework, knowledge shows up when Joseph stops looking at only what the law permits and begins to ask what love requires. Truth shows up when he recognizes that walking away is not a choice Mary can make. Care shows up when he prioritizes Mary's safety over his own security. Commitment shows up when he binds himself to a future he cannot control. And respect shows up when he shares Mary's fate instead of deciding it for her. This is what love looks like. And this is how fear is interrupted. So, in our own lives, are there places where fear keeps repeating itself? Is there a way that love invites us to break that pattern? In this Advent, in whatever way we need to hear it, that is the witness Joseph offers to us. One of my favorite newer Christmas songs is written from his point of view. I am a carpenter, not a king, not a prophet, just a man with ordinary plans, living a life that made sense until it didn't. But again, what did he do? He made himself vulnerable, and he tied his future to someone else. And you know what that is? That's actually the word Emmanuel, which means God is with us. It's Emmanuel, which is not God watching from a distance. It's Emmanuel, not God waiting for fear to pass, but Emmanuel, God with us, like this carpenter demonstrated, who stayed. Because love does not take the easy way out.